It was a quiet afternoon at a small city cafe. Sunlight streamed gently through the tall glass windows, casting warm reflections across wooden tables. The soft sound of coffee machines blended with light conversation, and the faint melody of jazz playing in the background. Couples laughed. A student typed on her laptop. A barista carefully poured latte art into a cup. Everything felt peaceful. At a corner table near the window sat an older man. He wore a simple black jacket, dark jeans, and polished boots. His posture was straight but relaxed. In front of him rested a plain white coffee cup. He wasn't scrolling on a phone. He wasn't looking around for attention. He simply sat there, quietly observing the world move around him. Most people didn't even notice him. He looked like any ordinary man enjoying a calm afternoon. But if someone had looked closer, really looked, they might have sensed something different. There was a stillness about him, a quiet confidence. The kind of calm that doesn't come from comfort, but from control. No one inside that cafe knew they were sitting just a few feet away from Seagal. And no one knew that this peaceful moment was about to shatter. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest one. Sometimes it's the quiet man in the corner waiting. And in just a few seconds, someone was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The peaceful rhythm of the cafe shifted the moment the door swung open. A tall man in his early 30s stepped inside, followed by two friends who looked just as loud as he did. His boots hit the floor heavily, his voice already echoing before he even reached the counter. He wore an expensive jacket, flashy watch, and the kind of confidence that usually comes from never being challenged. He scanned the room like he owned it. People glanced up briefly, then returned to their conversations. The barista forced a polite smile. The man laughed loudly at something one of his friends said, clearly enjoying the attention. As he turned toward an empty table, he brushed past the older man sitting quietly near the window. But it wasn't just a brush. It was a hard shoulder slam. The older man's coffee cup tipped slightly, dark liquid spilling across the table and onto his sleeve. The cafe went silent for a split second. The older man calmly reached for a napkin. "I apologize," he said in a steady voice. The tall man stopped mid-step. "You apologize," he scoffed loudly. "You bumped into me." A few customers exchanged uncomfortable looks. They had seen exactly what happened. The older man didn't argue. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," he repeated calmly. That calmness irritated the bully instantly. "You almost ruined my jacket," he snapped, brushing his shoulder dramatically. "Do you even know how much this costs?" The older man looked at the small coffee stain on his own sleeve. "I'm sure it's valuable," he replied quietly. The bully's friends chuckled. "Oh, so he talks," one of them said mockingly. The tall man stepped closer now, invading the older man's personal space. "People like you need to pay attention," he continued. "This isn't a retirement home." A woman near the counter whispered, "That's enough," under her breath. But no one stepped in. The older man remained seated. No shaking hands, no raised voice, no defensive posture. He simply folded the napkin neatly and placed it beside the cup. That lack of reaction was confusing. Most people would argue back, or at least defend themselves. But this man didn't, and that made the bully uncomfortable. "What?" "Nothing to say," the tall man pressed. Silence. The older man finally lifted his eyes and met the bully's gaze. They were calm, focused, almost unreadable. For a brief second, something shifted. It was subtle but real. The bully felt it, and instead of backing down, he leaned further into aggression. "You think you're tough because you're quiet." He mocked loudly so the entire cafe could hear. "You think that stare means something?" A few phones slowly started recording. The tension in the room thickened. The older man finally spoke again. "You should let this go," he said gently. It wasn't a threat. It sounded more like advice. But the bully took it as a challenge. "Oh, I should," he laughed. "Or what?" The older man didn't answer. He simply reached for his coffee again as if the conversation was already over. That dismissal was the final spark. The bully's pride couldn't handle being ignored. He stepped even closer now, standing directly over the seated man. "You don't get to ignore me," he growled. The cafe had completely stopped functioning at this point. No one was eating, no one was talking. Every eye was locked on the confrontation. And yet the older man's breathing never changed. His posture remained steady, as if he had seen this type of situation before, as if he knew something the bully didn't. And that quiet certainty only made the bully angrier. Because some men aren't searching for respect. They're searching for dominance. And when they can't find fear in someone's eyes, they try to create it. But this man wasn't afraid. Not even close. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, would you stay calm in this situation? And salute to everyone who chooses dignity over ego. The tension inside the cafe was no longer subtle. It was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The tall man stood over the older gentleman, trying to dominate the space with nothing but noise and presence. His friends hovered behind him, half laughing, half watching to see how far this would go. But the older man didn't move. He didn't stand up. He didn't argue. He didn't even look intimidated. He simply looked steady. And that steadiness was starting to feel like an insult. "You think you're better than me," the bully said, lowering his voice slightly but sharpening his tone. "You sitting there all calm like you're some kind of wise old monk." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. A man near the counter whispered, "This is going too far." But still, no one stepped in. The older man finally lifted his gaze again. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, just awareness. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," he replied quietly. The bully smirked. "Then act like it." His friends snickered again, feeding off the energy. They were enjoying the performance. To them, this was entertainment, a harmless display of dominance. But something about this situation felt different. The older man's silence wasn't weakness. It was control, and control is dangerous when misunderstood. The bully leaned closer, close enough that his shadow fell across the table. "You know what your problem is," he continued. "You old guys think the world still owes you respect. It doesn't." The older man didn't flinch. "Respect isn't owed," he said calmly. "It's chosen." That answer landed harder than any insult. For a brief second, the bully hesitated. Not because he was afraid, but because he didn't expect intelligence. He expected anger, or apology, or submission. Instead, he got composure. And composure makes insecure people furious. The bully straightened up, raising his voice again so the entire cafe could hear. "Look at this guy," he announced. "Thinks he's some kind of philosopher." A few forced laughs echoed from his friends. Phones were fully out now. People sensed something was about to happen. The older man slowly stood up from his chair. Not aggressively, not suddenly. Just rising. And when he stood, something shifted again. He wasn't small. He wasn't fragile. He stood tall, shoulders squared, movements precise. There was a presence about him now that hadn't been obvious while he was seated. The bully noticed it too. But pride wouldn't let him step back. "You trying to square up?" he mocked, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his voice. The older man simply picked up his napkin and folded it neatly. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away," he said. The words were soft, but they weren't a request. They were a warning disguised as kindness. And that's when the crowd fully understood. This wasn't an ordinary man. The cafe had gone completely silent. Even the barista had stopped moving. The bully's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being the uncertain one. He wasn't used to someone looking at him without fear. And instead of recognizing the opportunity to leave with dignity, he chose ego. "You don't give me chances," he snapped. "I decide what happens here." He stepped forward aggressively, pushing the older man's shoulder. A clear escalation. Gasps filled the room. The older man barely moved from the shove. Balanced. Rooted, like a mountain that doesn't shift when wind pushes against it. The bully's breathing was heavier now, not from fear, from frustration. Because no matter what he did, he couldn't break the calm. And when someone cannot control a situation, they often choose to explode. The tension reached its breaking point, and everyone in that cafe felt it. Because the next move wouldn't be words. It would be something no one could undo. And the bully was seconds away from crossing a line he could never uncross. The air inside the cafe felt frozen. No one spoke, no one moved. The bully's chest rose and fell heavily as frustration took over his face. His pride was bruised, not by insults, not by force, but by something far worse, control. The older man stood in front of him balanced and calm, as if the chaos swirling around them didn't exist. That composure became unbearable. "You think you're untouchable," the bully snapped. The older man didn't answer. He simply looked at him, steady, unshaken. And in that silence the bully made his decision. Without warning, he raised his hand. Time seemed to slow. Several people gasped. A woman near the window covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Don't," but it was too late. The slap landed sharply across the older man's face. The sound cracked through the cafe like a gunshot. A cup shattered on the floor. A chair scraped loudly as someone stood up in shock. Then, silence. The bully's friends stopped smiling. The phones kept recording. The entire cafe felt the weight of what had just happened. The older man's head had turned slightly from the impact. For a brief second, everything was still. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his face back forward. His expression hadn't changed. No rage, no humiliation, no panic. Just the same calm eyes. The bully blinked. He had expected something different. A swing, a shout, a collapse. But the older man simply adjusted his jacket sleeve where the coffee stain still lingered. The silence stretched longer than anyone was comfortable with. "You going to cry now?" the bully muttered. though his voice wasn't as confident as before. The older man looked directly into his eyes. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But something in his tone made several people shift uneasily. The bully laughed again, trying to reclaim control.
"Oh yeah? And what are you going to do about it?"
Still, the older man didn't move aggressively. Instead, he slowly reached into his jacket pocket. A collective breath was held across the cafe. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out his phone. Calmly, he glanced at the screen, typed something quickly, then placed it back in his pocket. The bully scoffed. "That's it. You texting your grandson?" A few uncomfortable laughs came from his friends, but even they looked unsure now. Because the energy in the room had shifted. It wasn't fear of the bully anymore. It was anticipation. The older man picked up his coffee cup again. Took a slow sip, even with a red mark forming on his cheek. The disrespect had been public. But his reaction was private, controlled, measured. The bully felt it. And suddenly, his earlier confidence started thinning. "Say something," he barked, trying to provoke a reaction. The older man placed the cup down gently. "I already did," he replied. The cafe doors were closed. But outside, a low rumble could be heard. Engines, heavy, coordinated, approaching. A few customers near the window glanced outside instinctively. Black vehicles turned the corner. Slow, purposeful. The bully hadn't noticed yet. He was too focused on proving dominance. But the older man had noticed, and his eyes revealed something new now. Not anger, not revenge, finality. Because some lines once crossed the can't be erased. The bully had wanted attention. He had wanted power. He had wanted to humiliate someone in public. But what he didn't realize was that he had just humiliated the wrong man. And in a matter of seconds, everyone in that cafe would understand exactly who he had just slapped. The low rumble outside grew louder. At first, it blended into the normal city noise, traffic, engines, distant horns. But this was different. It was synchronized, controlled, intentional. Inside the cafe, the bully was still standing too close, trying to maintain dominance. "You think I'm scared of you?" he mocked, though the edge in his voice was no longer sharp. "You're just some old guy with a phone." The older man looked at him steadily. "I gave you a chance," he said calmly. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. A few customers near the window turned their heads again. Black SUVs had pulled up outside. Not one, 3. They parked with precise spacing, engines still running. The cafe's glass windows reflected the vehicles like dark mirrors. One of the bully's friends noticed first. Bro," he muttered quietly. But the bully ignored him. He was too focused on saving face. "You think calling someone is going to fix this?" He laughed nervously.
"Who did you call, huh?"
"Mall security." The older man didn't respond. He simply adjusted his cuff and stepped slightly to the side, creating space between them. That small movement felt deliberate, measured, like someone preparing for something already decided. The cafe doors opened, not rushed, not chaotic, but purposeful. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside, earpieces, sharp posture, eyes scanning the room. The entire atmosphere changed instantly. No one spoke. Even the bully went quiet for half a second. The suited men didn't look at him first. They looked at the older man. One gave a subtle nod. "Sir." That single word echoed louder than the slap had. The bully swallowed. "What is this?" he asked, trying to laugh it off. More suited men entered behind the first 2, spreading calmly throughout the cafe. They weren't aggressive. They weren't shouting. They were securing. Professional, controlled. The older man remained still. "Is there a problem here?" One of the agents asked evenly, eyes now locked on the bully. The bully stepped back slightly. No problem. Just misunderstanding." His confidence had cracked. The phones that were recording earlier were still raised, but now the focus had shifted. The power dynamic had flipped completely. The older man finally spoke again. "There was no misunderstanding," he said calmly. "You made a choice." The bully's face drained of color. Outside, one more black vehicle pulled up, this one slightly larger. The door opened, and a high-ranking official stepped out. Sharp suit, command in his posture, authority without noise. He entered the cafe slowly. The agent straightened subtly as he passed. The bully's breathing grew uneven. The official approached the older man directly. His voice softened. "Dad, are you all right?" The word hit the room like thunder. "Dad." Several people gasped. The bully's knees nearly buckled. The quiet man in the corner, the one he had insulted, mocked, shoved, and slapped, wasn't just anyone. He was the father of one of the most powerful security officials in the country. And the man standing calmly in front of him was Seagal. The realization settled in slowly. Heavy, unavoidable. The bully opened his mouth, but no words came out. Moments ago, he had been laughing. Now he looked small, exposed. The older man, Stephen, looked at his son briefly and nodded. No anger, No dramatic reaction, just composure. The agents waited for instructions. The cafe waited. The bully trembled slightly, understanding that consequences were now standing inches away. But what happened next was something no one expected. If you were in that cafe, what would you have done at that moment? Comment below, would you choose revenge or dignity? The words still echoed in the cafe. Dad, are you all right? Every phone in the room was recording now. The bully stared at the high-ranking official, then back at the older man in disbelief. This wasn't mall security. This wasn't a bluff. This was real authority. The official stepped closer to the older man, his voice low but firm. Did he touch you? The question hung heavy in the air. The bully's confidence evaporated completely. His friends had already stepped back, distancing themselves physically and emotionally. The older man, Seagal, looked at his son calmly.
Yes,
he said simply. He did. The agents shifted position immediately. Two stepped forward toward the bully. Professional, controlled, efficient. The bully raised his hands instinctively.
Wait, I didn't know.
I didn't know who he was. His voice cracked, and that sentence revealed everything. Stephen's expression didn't change. That's the problem, he replied quietly. The entire cafe felt the weight of those words, because respect should not depend on identity. The official turned toward the agents. Detain him. The bully's breath hitched. Sir, please. It was just a misunderstanding, I was joking. It wasn't serious. But no one in that room believed that. Moments ago he had been loud, aggressive, dominant. Now he was pleading. Two agents secured his arms, not violently but firmly. The cafe remained silent except for the faint sound of chairs shifting as people moved to get a better view. The bully looked directly at Stephen. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean it. Stephen stepped forward slightly. You meant every second of it, he answered calmly. The truth stung harder than any punishment. The official watched his father carefully. Do you want to press charges? He asked respectfully. That question shifted the room again. Because now, it wasn't about power. It was about choice. Stephen glanced around the cafe. At the frightened barista. At the shaken customers. At the broken cup on the floor. Then he looked at the bully, who no longer looked powerful at all. I don't need revenge, Stephen said slowly. I need him to understand. The agents paused. The official studied his father's face. Understood, he replied. The agents loosened their hold slightly but kept the bully restrained. Stephen stepped closer, close enough that only those nearby could hear clearly. You didn't hit me because I bumped into you, he said calmly. You hit me because you thought I was weak. The bully couldn't look him in the eyes. You saw gray hair and silence, Stephen continued, and you assumed it meant you were safe. A tear of humiliation formed in the bully's eye. I was wrong, he whispered. Yes, Stephen replied. You were. The official signaled the agents. Escort him out. The bully wasn't dragged. He wasn't thrown to the ground. He was simply walked out of the cafe, his arrogance replaced by shame. As the black SUVs prepared to leave, the tension inside the cafe slowly dissolved. People exhaled. Some clapped quietly. Others just stared at Stephen in awe. But he didn't acknowledge the attention. He picked up his coffee cup again, sat down, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. His son approached once more. Dad, you shouldn't sit alone like this, he said softly. Stephen gave a faint smile. If I can't sit peacefully in public, he replied, then we've already lost something important. The official nodded, understanding. Within minutes, the agents exited. The vehicles drove away. The cafe returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing felt quite the same, because everyone inside had witnessed something powerful. Not violence, not dominance, but controlled strength. And they had learned a lesson without ever being taught one directly. Sometimes, the most dangerous mistake you can make is underestimating the quiet man in the corner. The cafe slowly came back to life. Chairs shifted back into place. Whispers turned into quiet conversations. The barista carefully cleaned the broken cup from the floor. But the energy had changed. Moments ago, people were watching a confrontation. Now, they were reflecting on a lesson. Stephen remained seated for a few seconds longer, finishing the last sip of his coffee as if nothing unusual had happened. No dramatic speech. No demand for attention. Just composure. A young man from another table finally approached him carefully. Sir, I just wanted to say the way you handled that. I don't think I could have stayed that calm. Stephen looked up at him with a small, understanding smile. Calm isn't weakness, he replied. It's control. The young man nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Across the cafe, a woman whispered to her friend. He could have destroyed him, but he didn't. And that was the real power in the room. Not the SUVs, not the agents, not the authority. It was restraint. Stephen stood up, adjusted his jacket, and placed a few bills on the table for the coffee and the inconvenience. As he walked toward the exit, People moved slightly aside, not out of fear, but out of respect. The same man who had been insulted, shoved, and slapped was now the most respected person in the room, not because of who his son was, not because of status, but because of how he chose to respond. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Cars passed, pedestrians crossed the street, life continued. Stephen paused for a brief moment near the cafe door. The official, his son, stood nearby, still concerned. "You could have let us handle it immediately," his son said quietly. Stephen looked at him. "If I react with anger every time someone disrespects me," he said, "then I'm no different from them." His son understood. Strength isn't about proving you're powerful. It's about knowing you are, and not needing to show it. Inside the cafe, the bully's earlier laughter felt distant now, unreal, almost embarrassing. Because the loudest man in the room had become the smallest, and the quietest man had been the strongest all along. Stephen stepped out into the sunlight. No cameras, no interviews, no celebration. Just another ordinary day. But for everyone who witnessed what happened, it wasn't ordinary at all. They had seen something rare. A man who didn't allow ego to control him. A man who understood that true respect is not demanded, it's demonstrated. And maybe, just maybe, that bully would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Not because he was embarrassed, but because he was shown a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. Sometimes life gives you a chance to walk away. Sometimes it gives you a chance to learn. And sometimes it teaches you that the person you try to humiliate might be the one with the most power in the room. But real power doesn't shout. It doesn't swing first. It doesn't need validation. It simply stands still and lets the truth reveal itself. If you believe respect should be given to everyone, no matter who they are, comment Rospashiu and tell me, would you have stayed calm or reacted differently?